Hi, Founder fans, Jason here, and today's founder is Tapping Reeve, the founder of Litchfield Law School, and a man who had a tremendous impact on the early development of America's legal system. Now, Tapping Reeve was born in Brookhaven Township on Long Island, and just like yours truly, but unlike yours truly, his father was a reverend who made enough of a living to send Tapping to the future Princeton University, at the time known as the College of New Jersey. And at the College of New Jersey, Tapping Reeve studied under the president of the university, as well as educating his children, because while a student at Princeton, or College of New Jersey, Tapping Reeve also taught at the Associated Grammar School. Most universities at the time, or colleges, had a grammar school for the local children to learn at, and it gave people an opportunity to educate the children, and Reeve began his career as an educator here. Now, interestingly enough, the president of the College of New Jersey was a man named Aaron Burr Sr., and that name probably sounds a bit familiar because his son would be a future vice president. And I'll remind you, I had just mentioned that Tapping Reeve educated this man's children, which means that as a child, Tapping Reeve educated both Aaron Burr Jr., future vice president and questionable character, and his sister, Sally Burr. Now, after he graduated university, Tapping Reeve would move to Litchfield, New Jersey, where he studied law under Jesse Root, and eventually, well, he moved to Hartford, where he studied law in Connecticut, but then he moves to Litchfield, where he opens up a practice. And shortly thereafter, his former pupil, now late teenager, Aaron Burr, comes to Litchfield to study law under Reeve. This is in the early 1770s. Burr, of course, would go on to fight in the Revolution itself and have a long and storied career for another time. But interestingly enough, Tapping Reeve also married another former pupil, his Aaron Burr's sister, Sally Burr, and he marries into the Burr family, who were a very important family in both colonial New Jersey, but more importantly in colonial Connecticut. With these connections being made, Reeve continues for the next decade to enhance his legal career, all the while taking on apprentices. Most lawyers would take on other future lawyers as students to help with some of the paperwork involved with being a lawyer, and in return educate them. And Reeve started out in exactly the same fashion. Now, when the American Revolutionary War does break out, Reeve is a patriot and supports the Patriots. He is briefly commissioned as a officer in the Connecticut militia, but he almost immediately resigns because his spouse Sally was pretty constantly sick, and he was the one there to care for her. So he doesn't really participate in the war itself, though, as I mentioned, he's already educated at this point a few American revolutionaries. Additionally, he travels around Connecticut trying to recruit enlistments for the militia, and does pretty successfully for a handful of months. Now, as the war is coming to a conclusion, there is a famous lawsuit that takes place in northern neighboring Massachusetts, and this is the Elizabeth Freeman trial. It is a freedom suit brought on by Theodore Sedgwick and Elizabeth Freeman, a slave to a family in Sheffield, Massachusetts, who had overheard some people talking about liberty and had heard a reading of the Massachusetts Constitution of 1780, which declared that all men were free and equal. And she went over to Theodore Sedgwick's house, and said, "Hey, Theodore, does this mean we're all really free and equal?" And Theodore, a proto-abolitionist, if you will, said, "Yeah, I think you got a case here." And Theodore Sedgwick is famous as his her enslaved name was Mumbet, but her free name that she took on was Elizabeth Freeman. They sued the state of Massachusetts, which eventually, after several trials, ends with State Chief Justice William Cushing essentially saying, yes, this Constitution has already outlawed slavery in Massachusetts. So it's not like we are going to outlaw slavery in Massachusetts. It's like, whoopsie daisy, we accidentally already did, but Massachusetts was in the type of environment and type of thought at the time where most people were like, okay, great, that solves that problem. And essentially carries on without slavery from there on out. Now, I bring this up because Tapping Reeve, his notoriety as a lawyer having spread to neighboring states, he was called in to sit on the council with Theodore Sedgwick to help Elizabeth Freeman and several other slaves joined in on the suit to successfully declare slavery illegal in Massachusetts. And the reason this is important is because it's Reeve's participation in this case that brings his notoriety outside Connecticut and really makes him well known as a lawyer. And additionally, people are realizing, hey, he trained Aaron Burr, that guy who's like rising in politics right now. And he trained, this guy. He's pretty good at teaching people law. So by 1784, just 10 years really after, 12 years after Aaron Burr shows up as one of his earliest students, Reeve has so many people knocking on his door that he has to build another structure on his house. It is the first floor of his house that he is generally giving instruction on, but he has to build another structure to house books and materials and things of that nature. Many of the people coming to him to learn the law are staying in Litchfield with other people who are most students of the law at the time, then as now, had a good deal of money, maybe not so much now, but had a great deal of money, so they were happy to let people stay in their house for a little bit of rent or a lot of bit of rent, and he was bringing a lot of money to the town of Litchfield at the time. He carries on this, and I'm going to talk a little bit in a minute about just some of the names that actually come through the Litchfield Law School, in addition to Aaron Burr, but suffice to say, over the ensuing 14 years, he educates a ton of people. One of them is a gentleman named James Gould. James Gould ends up becoming not only his apprentice, but essentially his number two, working in all facets of the business, helping to educate other students. Eventually, in 1798, Tapping Reeve is appointed to Connecticut's Supreme Court as an associate justice. And that's when Gould really steps in and does a lot of the educating. And Reeve, actually 14 years later in 1812, I believe was the year, he is promoted to Chief Justice of the state of Connecticut. So that in itself can speak to his importance in the legal system in that state as well as New England. But he continues working at the school until about 1820 when he retires because he's grown old at that point after 35, almost 40 years of educating students. He gives the business to Gould. Reeve passed away a few years later, and Gould keeps the school open until just 1833. So it is in existence for just under 50 years. But in that time, there are over 1,100 people educated as lawyers. And this includes not just no presidents, but Aaron Burr and also future Vice President John C. Calhoun, who has questionable character. He is more notable for after the American founding. Most of the people trained under Reeve are more of the second generation of American leaders, the early Republic leaders, who come to power, from the Monroe administration to the Jackson administration to the Polk administration. Some were even still around for the Civil War. Calhoun almost makes it. So that's two vice presidents he educates, but I'm also going to run through a little bit of this list really quick. I'm not going to take up your whole day. But there are 101 members of the United States House of Representatives, 28 United States senators, 6 cabinet secretaries of the United States, 3 justices of the United States Supreme Court, not chief justices, but associate justices of the Supreme Court, 14 state governors, 13 state Supreme Court chief justices, as well as a whole slew of business leaders, artists, every facet of society. Many of these law students end up going into. And if you just think of the list I just named of hundreds of people who shaped the legal system of the young United States were very specifically educated by Tapping Reeve, some of them more by Gould, but primarily by Reed. I'm not even going to run through the names here because there is a laundry list of amazing names next to me. I suggest you look it up. But that is, in essence, the weight of Tapping Reeve's effect. Not only did he help prove that slavery had already been illegal in Massachusetts, and not only did he run law in Connecticut, but he inspired and educated the lawmakers of the first 50 years of the United States in what the law was. And I will throw out that he published 2 books, but only one is really notable. I forget the name of it. It's a very lengthy name, but essentially he published the first book of family law to be studied in the United States, which was taken very seriously throughout the young republic. So that is a very brief overview of Tapping Reeve. I've hit 10 minutes, so this is a longer video than I usually put out, but Tapping Reeve is just that important. I hope you learned a little bit today. If you did, definitely hit like. Don't forget to hit like. It really helps me out. If you're new here, subscribe. I put out videos about the American Revolution 7 days a week, and I will be back with another founder for you tomorrow.